Hey guys, this is AI Gaming 1776. We are playing Batman Arkham Knight with a GTX 745 on the lowest settings with VSync off at a resolution of 720p. You can see all that on the screen right there before you. Full screen, 720p. Everything is on off or low, and it still uses almost the full 2 gigabytes of VRAM. You can see that over to the right. In the upper right hand corner, there is a fraps counter. And we are going to tool around here for a second. We're going to fly, we're going to drive, we're going to see how it performs. Now, if you have a short attention span and you don't want to watch the whole video, I can tell you the game is playable with a 745 at 720p. It is pretty much 30 frames per second and above with VSync off, and it's still in the mid 20s, high 20s with VSync on. That's at 720p. However, if you want to play at other resolutions, it can do 1080p at about 18 frames per second for the most part, and it can do 900p at about 25 frames per second for the most part. And both of those should be with VSync off. All right, so what we're going to do is we are going to play a game called Try to Jump on the Blimp, or even Touch the Blimp. I've never been able to do it so far. I don't think I ever will. Maybe I could. My little grapnel launcher thing admittedly is one notch. Ooh, wait a minute. You know what? It's 2 notches away from being maxed out. Just remember that. So let's go max that out real quick. And actually, I'm going to turn on VSync too because there is a little bit of screen tearing. The screen tearing is not too bad with the 745 for what it's worth, but I still don't like screen tearing at all. Okay, so let's go over here. I forgot you can play the game for a long time and it won't save. I'm not sure what triggers a save. So I've upgraded that thing a few times. And then I always forget when I start my game back up that it's not actually upgraded. All right. Let's try it now. So yeah, it's playable. It's a little kind of ugly at 720p if I'm honest, but at the same time the draw distance is really impressive considering you are playing with a GTX 745. It is at 720p, but the draw distance still looks good. You can see all that stuff down there. You can see a lot of things in the distance. But for the most part, not super attractive because again, you are playing at the lowest of settings, and it is 720p. Now, I've gotten closer to the blimps than this. I've actually just barely scraped that undercarriage before. And if you guys know of a video showing that you can get on the blimp or in the blimp, I would love to see such a video. So let me know. Put a link in the comments if you would. Or maybe I'll search it out. I don't know. Anyway, look, we're in the 50s now. Now it's going into the 40s. See, the more you look at this, the more you look at the sky, the higher the frame rate goes. See, there's 60. Look at the ground, frame rate goes down. Still not too bad. I mean, 35 is not shabby. All right, so we need to get in the Batmobile now. Look how high off the ground this guy is. Look, seriously, look how high we were above the clock tower. Now, a lot of you should know about that clock tower. You're in that clock tower pretty early in the game. Let me circle back around. Where is it at? Where is it? I was just over the thing. Oh, it's this. It's this with the blue lights on it. Actually, let's get real high up over it again. Yeah, I like the flying in this game. The flying's pretty good. Now, it's very playable. It's very playable at 720p. It's very playable at these frame rates. It's not beautiful. It's not the best thing in the world, but it's not bad either. I mean, it's doable. All right. Let's swing back over to this clock tower. Oh, there it is. Okay, we're not high enough like we were earlier, but I'm not going to deal with it anymore. I was trying to get really high above it, but still, you guys saw that clock tower, and it's one of the higher things at the start of the game. We were really way above it. Still kind of far above it. If this was real life, like if you could drop down like this, like I'm about to do, like this in real life, that would be ridiculous. That is a pretty big fall. All right. Huh, what's that? Here comes the Batmobile. Oh, by the way, the frame rate doesn't get too much lower than it currently is in the Batmobile, which is nice. Because you might have thought, like, okay, well, it's 35 just flying around, or it's 30 just flying around, so maybe in the Batmobile it's going to be in the teens, but no, it's not. Whereas at 1080p, with something like the GTX 960, you can take a 20 or 30 frame per second hit when you get in the Batmobile. Here, I mean, we're still in the 20s. It's 25. Now, I think I have seen it go as low as 18 with the 745 at 720p. But, like I said, it's still playable. So, yeah, I don't know how it shows up in this video, but it looks, I guess grainy isn't the right word, but it doesn't look great. Now, I am using a 1080p monitor playing in 720p, so there could be scaling issues. But, I mean, it's playable. I was just trying to get down here, like very poorly, but I was still trying to get down here, so. Still have control over the game. I actually have not been down here before. I'm only 17% of the way through the story, so I'm sure there's a lot I haven't seen. I mean, I've been to all 3 islands. I've putzed around, I've flown around, I've done all that, but on the ground, there's a lot of stuff I haven't been to yet. Yeah, it looks a little blurry, a little grainy, because again, it's at 720p, I'm playing on a 1080p monitor. But the YouTube video might actually look better. I've noticed sometimes the YouTube video does not look as good as what I'm seeing on the screen, and sometimes it looks better than what I'm seeing on the screen, and I haven't really figured out the how to predict it, but normally for how not good this looks, being in 720p on a 1080p monitor and so on, normally when it's like on this level for me while I play it live, the YouTube video actually looks a little better. So we'll see. But no, it's totally playable. I mean, it's in the 30s for the most part. All right, so let us see if we can do anything with the settings. If I can get up here. There we go. No. All right. So we're up here. That's actually kind of pretty. See, there's a lot of nice touches to the game. How like everything goes out of focus. I mean, that's pretty good looking. Even on the 745. All right, let's go to graphics. Let's try. By the way, look. So we're at 1848. So we're at about 18 and about 1.8. We're about 1.8 gigabytes of VRAM out of 4 gigabytes. This is the 4 gigabyte version of the GTX 745. So we're about 1.8. Now, we're about 2.6, just clicking up to normal for the textures, and then we're at 3.3 for VRAM, more than 3 gigabytes of VRAM by going to high. So yeah, the textures just wreck your VRAM. And that's at 720p. Yeah, at 720p it almost doubles the VRAM usage to go to high. So that's pretty crazy. 720p using almost 3.5 gigabytes of VRAM. If we actually turn, let's go ahead and turn all this on just to see what happens, just to be funny. Just under the 4 gigabytes of VRAM. What's interesting is at 1080p it goes to 4.1. Here, let's restart the game. So at 1080p, when you max all that out with the 4 gigabyte GTX 960, that uses 4.1 gigabytes. Whereas maybe almost 4.2. It's been a while since I've paid attention. I have to double check. But yeah, it still used 3.9, so that's a lot. It's a lot of VRAM at 720p. Interestingly enough, just standing here, we're at 27 frames per second. It's a little bit slow motion when you move the camera around. Let us turn VSync back off. All right. How bad can this be? This is playable, but, and I say this all the time in my videos, and I know not everyone agrees, but I think when you stress the graphics card out too much, like I don't think this looks great. And to me, the whole reason why you turn settings up is because you want the game to look better. I don't think it looks better. Like, I do not appreciate very much since I turned the settings up. I do wonder if the level of detail would be appreciable though. So I think what I'll do is after I do this, after I screw around with this for a minute, I'm actually going to turn everything back low again so that we can have a higher frame rate, but I'll turn the level of detail up. Because I've played with this with the textures on high and everything down low, and I didn't appreciate it too much. It wasn't, it didn't really make the experience much better. But I do think as I watch it right now, I think I do appreciate the higher detail level. I'm actually really surprised. We're in the 20s with the GTX 745. I mean, we are playing at 18 frames per second there. I mean, we are playing at 720p, but still we're also maxed out, so that's pretty interesting. Yeah, it's kind of blurry and slow motion-y a little bit. It's not ideal. Let's get in the Batmobile. Yeah, that's real blurry on my end while I'm watching this. $22, $24. That's actually not... Oh, 17, 18, 19, 20. I was going to say like 22 to 24 frames per second is not horrible, considering it's maxed out. Of course, it is also, again, at 720. It's a little harder to control, I'm not going to lie. I'm having to, before the turn comes, I'm kind of having to think it out because it doesn't feel as immediately responsive. So I'm having to think about the turn before I actually commit to it. Here, I wanted to smash that guy. I mean, just for the lulz, playing it maxed out is kind of funny just because you can. Ooh, that's really slow motion. It just went down to 15. It was at 16, then it went to 15. Yeah, I'm not a fan of this, not gonna lie. Alright, let's turn everything down except level of detail. Oh yeah, turn that up. The trilinear filtering is not terrible in this game, by the way. Alright, let's see how it does. Let's see how it plays. Let's see how it feels. Look at that. 40 frames per second just standing here. 30. 28, 29. Into the 40s. Yeah, I think just turning up level of detail might be a viable option. I'm about to turn on VSync though. Yeah, let's turn on VSync. Alright, so it's going between the 20s and the 40s so far. It hit the 50s for half a second there. Ooh, that was like shocking. It was like blurring and shocking. It went down to 22. I mean, it's not like there's such a thing as a free lunch. It will affect performance a little bit to turn that level of detail up. Like in most instances, it doesn't seem to be hitting the performance too hard. But then when I try to do the diving and stuff like that and the pulling back up, it does seem to hit it. Also, as far as things in the distance, I've not analyzed this game well enough to see what level of detail really, really does. But looking at it right now, it looks like I can make out landmarks much better. Here, the clock is... All right, look, the clock tower is really easy to make out almost straight in front of me to the right. And then there's some stuff to the left on that island. Let's turn level of detail back down and see if that changes it. No, I just saw a bunch of stuff change on the screen. The clock tower was still really easy to make out. Yeah, it's still really easy to make out. So let's try this again. So it looks like it just adds more lights and stuff on the ground, maybe some more windows. Not really sure. Not really sure how much it helps. I think that when I get close to buildings though, like when I'm not flying so high above them, but when I'm flying more in between the buildings, I feel like I appreciate level of detail being up. Again, maybe it's showing stuff like the windows there and the segmenting. I don't know. I was gonna say segmenting in between the window panes and the brickwork and things like that. Not really sure. I haven't fully analyzed it, nor have I gone to GeForce.com. Now, NVIDIA's GeForce.com normally does a pretty good job telling you exactly how each setting works in each game. For example, in Far Cry 4, they have an environment setting, and my understanding is just go to GeForce.com. I don't want to butcher this, but it would kind of be what I think level of detail is doing here. Ooh, totally ruined that. Yeah, go to GeForce.com. It's actually a really good resource. GeForce.com will tell you all of the different NVIDIA graphics cards. It will tell you really key things. Like, now some of it only applies to the reference card, i.e. what kind of connectors it has. Like, it'll tell you the GTX 980 requires two 6-pin connectors, but that's for a reference card. Now, you can get like a Gigabyte G1 gaming card. I'm pretty sure it's going to need at least one 8-pin power connector. I could be wrong, but I would assume it would. And things like the 980 Ti, I believe the reference 980 Ti takes one 8-pin and one 6-pin, whereas my EVGA Classified takes two 8-pins. So it'll tell you, at the very least for the reference cards, what to expect for the power connections. It'll tell you the temperatures that it can run at. It'll tell you the CUDA core count. It'll tell you again, this applies to reference, but it'll tell you the base clock speed, the boost clock speed, things like that. And then again, it'll also tell you, it'll give you the size of the cards, which again applies to reference, because if you get a third party, board partner card, that's going to be different. Of course, you're watching a GTX 745 video, and it's not like they make specialty GTX 745s that all this kind of stuff applies to. But if you have a GTX 745, you might be curious about upgrading it. That's the situation I was in. And GeForce.com was a pretty good resource. That's NVIDIA's website, by the way, in case that's not obvious. You can also check to see if your drivers are up to date there, if you want to do that. And that website also will tell you what each of the settings does. So we're about to drive. Remember, we've had everything on low except for level of detail. It's totally playable. I don't love it. I'm not going to lie to you. It's just barely acceptable to me with a GTX 960, and even then it's really kind of not. And then I'd say a GTX 970, and I really hate saying that, but a GTX 970 is probably the so-called weakest NVIDIA card out of their current cards that is not super disappointing. Because even with the 960, I found performance to be disappointing. Whereas with the 960, I can play The Witcher 3 just fine. I can play GTA 5 just fine. Now, for reference, guys, I have the 745, I have a 960, I have a 970, and I have a 980 Ti. I do not have a 950, I do not have a 980 at the time of recording this. But I pretty much have NVIDIA's modern lineup to compare to. So, remember, I have a 980 Ti to compare to. So if I say something's enjoyable on a 960, it's legit enjoyable on a 960. Like it's not like a 960 is all I have, so like I settle for it, if that makes sense. So again, GTA 5, The Witcher 3, even Crysis 3 is surprisingly enjoyable with a 960. And if you turn off MSAA, MSAA, if you turn off MSAA completely, then Far Cry 3 is even enjoyable on it. Now, I normally like MSAA in that game. I don't know why I'm struggling with that. But anyway, I normally like MSAA times 2 or even times 4 in Far Cry 3. And doing that with a 960 is not such a great idea. But I actually reached a point where Far Cry 3 is enjoyable with the 960 if I don't use MSAA. Far Cry 4 is enjoyable with the 960. Most games on the market are enjoyable with the 960. Now, I have not played Arma or any of those non-mainstream games that might be hard to run, so I don't have experience there. Oh, I don't like Battlefield Hardline on weaker graphics cards. I don't know if it's an NVIDIA thing. I don't know if it's something with my computer. But Battlefield Hardline kind of has micro stutters for me on anything but my 980 Ti. I don't know what it is. I mean, it's got a good frame rate with the 960 and the 970, but it still feels like it has micro stutters. So anyway, guys, yeah, like I said, if you had a short attention span at the start of the video and you just wanted to know if it's playable, it's totally playable with the 745 at 720p. Now, you've seen we have gone into the teens and the 20s at 720p. 900p is going to give you a lower frame rate. 1080p is going to give you a lower frame rate. And this is a game that requires at least a little bit of precision. So, unfortunately, 720 seems to be the most playable from a frame rate standpoint with the GTX 745. I'm using an i7, I'm using a 4790 i7 processor, so it's fairly recent. The newer i7 4-core processor has only been on the market for a couple months now, so at the time of this recording. By the way, this is the re-release. I know I didn't make that clear at the start of the video, but this is the Arkham Knight re-release that came out at the end of October in 2015. I'm using, I think, NVIDIA's 358 driver. If you don't have the current driver, the game will tell you, just so you know. So if you do try to play this game and you don't have the most current driver, the game will say, hey, you don't have the most current driver, you might want to update it. Yeah, it's playable. I'm crashing into cars and stuff, driving around in the Batmobile. It's acceptable. So hopefully this video has been helpful for you guys. Hopefully it's giving you a little bit of insight. If you have a 745 and you're wondering, again, I'm recording that. It's actually November right now. I think it's November 2nd, 2015 as I record this. But if you have a 745 and you want to know what new NVIDIA card you should upgrade to, if you don't want to spend a lot of money, the 960 is good. You have to understand, if you get a 2GB 960, this game on its lowest settings at 720p almost uses 2GB. And it comes even closer to using 2GB at the lowest settings in 1080p. So you got to think of things like that. If you play Shadow of Mordor, a 2GB card is not going to be able to load very much of the textures, unfortunately. I'm not even sure if you can load the high textures with a 2GB card, because it takes a 6GB card to load the ultra textures. So that's something to think about. Now, there's a lot of games, even GTA 5, which is a VRAM hungry game. Even GTA 5 is acceptable with a 2GB GTX 960. I would still recommend a 4GB 960. The problem with that is 4GB 960s cost more money. I watch them like a hawk, and if you notice, graphics card prices can fluctuate. I got my 4GB EVGA GTX 960 Superclock for $219. Which is totally cool, because the cheapest 2GB GTX 960 I've seen is $199. So I literally paid an extra $20 to get the 4GB of VRAM. Unfortunately, I've often seen 4GB GTX 960s go for as high as $260. And that kind of sucks, because at that point you could pay $340 and get a 970, which, by the way, 970 is a great card. There is the 3.5GB of VRAM situation. Yeah. That does kind of suck. But it works. It even works at 1440p. And Jay's 2 Cents has talked about that. And he's talked about how he's put two 970s in SLI against the 980 Ti, and it's had good results. Sometimes two 970s and SLI have even beat the 980 Ti as far as pure frame rates go. But then other times the 980 Ti beats the two 970s and SLI. Just something to think about. But the point is, 980 Ti has 6 gigabytes of VRAM. 970 has 3.5 gigabytes, but the 970 can still hang a lot of times as far as VRAM usage goes. Although you go back to the whole Shadow of Mordor thing, obviously the 970 is not going to load all those textures, but even if you had the full 4 gigabytes, it wouldn't do it then either, because you need 6 gigabytes to load those textures. Anyway, point being, the 970 is a good card. If I could only have one graphics card and I wasn't running this channel and I was trying to get the best bang for the buck, I would have my 970. I wouldn't have my 980 Ti. I wouldn't have the 960. I'd have the 745 only because it came with my computer. But if I was trying to do bang for the buck and I only had one graphics card, it'd be a 970. And you also, now I came to that conclusion back in January, maybe February of 2015, but I think January. And what I've noticed is more and more people who have been building computers, even in October of 2015, which, by the way, is about a full year since the 970 and 980 came out. There's a lot of people who are building their computers with 970s because it is a good bang for the buck card. Although 980 Ti, even at the $650 price tag, the 980 Ti is just a really good card. It really is. It plays most of the I wonder where I am now. The 980 Ti plays most games, even in 1440p, at high to ultra settings and gets at least 60 frames per second. It's pretty nice. Huh. This area will probably, well, I say probably, I assume this area is going to open up later in the game. The 980 Ti can actually get, even at 1440p, in the 80s and 90s for the frame rate. I mean, it's pretty insane. At ultra settings, no less. I mean, at 1440p, it's pretty nice. And then at 1080p, the 980 Ti is going to crush any game you play. Except, yeah, Assassin's Creed Unity. Assassin's Creed Unity, I kid you not, at the Ultra preset, I think they call it Ultra... What do they call it at Assassin's Creed? Because it's not just Ultra. Is it Ultra High? Is it Ultra... I'd have to read it again. I haven't done it in a while. Anyway, Assassin's Creed Unity, the dog of the game that is, at 1080p, only gets like a consistent 65 frames per second. It can go higher, it can go lower, but it tends to stick around 65 frames per second in 1080p, which is scary bad with a 980 Ti. You would normally expect better than that. But I think that preset also uses MSAA times 4, if I remember correctly. It uses at least MSAA times 2. But it might use MSAA times 4, which, you know, that is going to affect frame rates in a lot of games, but still. Anyway, so the last half of this video has been me babbling, but I went through the process of having a GTX 745 come with my computer, and I went through the process of trying all these different graphics cards, so just I let you guys know what I've been through, because you might go through it too. Now, for what it's worth, I have a Dell XPS 8700, and even its stock power supply is 460 watts. It has two 6-pin connectors on it. I used a GTX 980 reference card, and the only thing I had to do was upgrade my BIOS. I have also extensively used the 970 super clock, but for some reason my version of the super clock had two 6-pin connectors instead of 1.8 and 1.6, whereas the one on Amazon has 1.8 and 1.6, which that's its own different story. But I tell you this because your computer is going to have an adequate power supply. It's going to have the proper connectors. It's also going to have room for the graphics card. If your computer with a GTX 745 does not have room, physical room to fit a graphics card in, you're going to have trouble. And then sometimes having room in the case isn't good enough. And I'll give you an example. I bought an Acer Aspire, I think, a really cheap Acer Aspire, but it came in a big full-size case. It had the PCI Express slot to put a graphics card in. And my plan for that was to buy this really cheap Acer. It was like $400. It had an AMD processor. I think it was 390. It had Windows 8.1. It had an AMD processor. It had, I think, 8 gigabytes of system RAM. But the point is, it was like $380, $390 brand new, and it was a full functioning computer. And the case was big enough to put a full-size graphics card in. So I wanted to try it. I knew I had to upgrade the power supply, which I had an extra power supply laying around, so I went to go do it. What happened was that Acer, once I got it home and tried to use it, I realized there were things on the motherboard blocking my GTX 970. I forget what they were, but there were things like soldered onto the motherboard that stuck up, and they made it impossible. It's not even like you could modify the case. Like, it was literally impossible to put the 970 in there. So what I did was I got one of those extension cord ribbon things for PCI Express, and what I did was I connected the 970 to it, used the bigger power supply, and it worked. It worked just fine. But I only did that as a test. I don't know if you want to buy a $400 Acer and then have to use an extension ribbon, which, by the way, the extension ribbon was really finicky. Like, it kept losing connection. So just something to think about. It's not something I recommend whatsoever. So the point is, the graphics card has to have room to fit. The case has to have room for it. The motherboard has to have room. The motherboard has to support it. My Dell XPS 8700, when the GTX 970 and the GTX 980 were first released, the Dell XPS 8700 could not use those cards. It needed a BIOS update for the motherboard. Luckily, all that was taken care of before I ever bought the computer. But people who had an XPS 8700 and then bought those graphics cards found out the hard way they couldn't even use them with their computers, and they were pretty disappointed. But Dell fixed it. So my computer, the Dell XPS 8700, came with a 3.6 Core i7 4790, 16 gigabytes of system RAM, and the ability to just drop a 980 in it once you had the BIOS update. It's pretty nice. But if you have a pre-built computer with a 745, it's possible your case doesn't have room for it. It's possible that your motherboard doesn't have room for it. It's possible that your motherboard won't support a new graphics card. It's possible that your power supply will in no way at all be able to do it. So there's considerations that you're going to have to make. Now, in case you're curious, for my 980 Ti, I absolutely had to upgrade the power supply, and I even had to modify the cage area, the drive cage area, quite a bit to make it fit. Because the 980 Ti classified is a monster. It is bigger than it looks in pictures. Okay, it's bigger than you can wrap your head around, unless you've seen really big graphics cards before, because it is bigger still than a 980 or a 970, like a lot bigger. Now, dimension wise, I looked on paper and I was like, oh yeah, it's bigger, but it shouldn't be a big deal. It was a huge deal. I had to completely modify my case to make that sucker fit. So again, hopefully this video has been helpful for you guys. Wow, just crashed. Hopefully this video has been helpful for you guys. Hopefully you've learned some things. It's been, enjoyable on some level. I don't know. Some people like it when I go into depth and detail with these videos, and some people don't. It's always going to be a mixed bag. You're never going to make the video in a way that makes everyone happy. But hopefully this has been informative for you guys and it's helped you out. If you do want to put a different graphics card in your computer, seriously, one of the smartest things you can do is go to forums. I went to the Dell forums, and I made sure that other people with 8700 XPS 8700 computers, the same configuration as mine, I made sure that they could actually use the graphics cards, and they could once the BIOS update was done. But I did a lot of research before I did it, and again, I used GeForce.com because GeForce.com tells you the size of the reference cards, which is a good place to start. It tells you the power requirements. It tells you a lot of pertinent information when making your choice. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe and share the video and all that jazz. And thank you for watching. Hopefully this has been helpful, and y'all have yourselves a good night.